Millionaire widow celebrated with her lover hours after burying her husband. The next morning, his last revenge left her homeless and in tears. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers as mourners gathered at Oak Hill Cemetery in Hartford, Connecticut. Patricia Harrison, elegant in her black designer dress, stood beside her husband's mahogany casket. At 62, her carefully maintained appearance couldn't hide the exhaustion in her green eyes, though not necessarily from grief. "Thomas was such a wonderful man," whispered an elderly woman, squeezing Patricia's hand. "You two were the perfect couple." Perfect. Patricia's red lips curved into a practiced smile as she thought about the champagne waiting in the wine cellar. In just a few hours, she would finally be free. Across the gathering, James Cooper adjusted his tie, casting a subtle glance in Patricia's direction. At 58, his silver-streaked hair and tailored suit projected the image of a successful real estate broker. Only Patricia knew the excitement burning behind his somber expression. Margaret Wilson, Thomas's best friend and VP of Harrison Real Estate, watched this silent exchange with mounting concern. After 40 years of friendship with Thomas, she knew when something wasn't right. As the priest's words faded into the cool October air, Patricia's mind drifted to 15 years earlier. She had been a waitress at Joey's Diner, wearing a pink uniform with coffee stains and sensible shoes that hurt her feet. That morning, she'd accidentally spilled coffee all over a customer's expensive suit. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll pay for the dry cleaning," she'd stammered, mortified. Instead of yelling, Thomas Harrison, one of Connecticut's wealthiest real estate developers, had laughed. "Don't worry about it, but you could join me for dinner instead?" His kindness had changed her life. Within a year, the former waitress became Mrs. Harrison, moving into his mansion and learning to navigate high society. Thomas had given her everything: designer clothes, exotic vacations, jewelry that cost more than she used to make in a year. But he had never given her what she truly wanted: his time, his attention, his passion. Sarah Miller, the elderly housekeeper who had served Thomas for 4 decades, moved quietly through the crowd, her weathered face tight with disapproval. That morning she had found something while cleaning Mrs. Harrison's room. Receipts from the Golden Swan Hotel dated just last week, when Thomas was still alive. Patricia's phone buzzed in her clutch. Glancing down, she saw a text from an unknown number. "I know what you've done for the past 2 years." Her hand trembled as she quickly deleted the message. Around her, mourners continued offering condolences, unaware that the grieving widow's heart was racing with fear rather than sorrow. "He was working until the very end," Margaret said loudly enough for Patricia to hear. "The night before he died, Thomas told me he had finally figured everything out. He left me a letter to open after the funeral." Patricia's practiced smile faltered for just a moment. What had Thomas figured out? And what was in that letter? James appeared at her side, perfectly playing the role of a respectful business associate. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm so sorry for your loss. The entire real estate community will miss Thomas deeply." Their fingers brushed as he handed her a business card. On the back, hastily scrawled, "Midnight, our usual place." Patricia tucked the card into her purse, her designer bracelet catching the autumn sunlight. The diamonds sparkled like tears, but her eyes remained dry. In just a few hours, she would trade her widow's weeds for a celebration dress. In just a few hours, her new life would begin. Or so she thought. What Patricia didn't know, what she couldn't have known as she stood by that flower-laden grave, was that Thomas Harrison had left behind much more than a fortune and a grieving widow. He had left a carefully orchestrated plan that would change everything. And it was already in motion. 12 hours after the funeral, laughter echoed through the Harrison mansion. Patricia, now wearing a red cocktail dress, raised her champagne glass with James in Thomas's study. "To us," James said, his eyes gleaming. "To our future." Patricia smiled, the weight of pretense finally lifting from her shoulders. "I can't believe we're finally free." "Free and rich," James added, pulling her close. "Do you know what the first thing I want to do is?" "Tell me." "Buy that beach house in Malibu we talked about, the one with the private beach." He traced his finger along the stem of his glass. "We could move there next month, leave all of this behind." Patricia's mind drifted to 2 years ago when she first met James at the Hartford Children's Hospital fundraiser. Thomas had been too busy with work to attend, as usual. She'd been standing alone when James approached with a charming smile and a sympathetic ear. "It must be lonely," he'd said that night, "being married to a man who loves his work more than anything." One coffee meeting led to another, and soon they were meeting at the Golden Swan Hotel every Thursday while Thomas worked late at the office. James understood her in a way Thomas never had. He listened. He made time for her. He made her feel alive again. James's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. He checked the screen and frowned. "I need to take this. Business never sleeps." He stepped onto the balcony, closing the door behind him. Patricia watched through the glass as his expression grew serious. He was gesturing animatedly, his face turning red with anger. When he thought she wasn't looking, he glanced back nervously. Something fell from his jacket pocket as he paced. Patricia waited until he turned away before stepping onto the balcony and quickly pocketing the fallen paper. Inside, Sarah moved silently through the mansion's halls, her camera phone recording the sounds of laughter and celebration. 40 years of loyalty to Thomas Harrison had taught her patience. Sometimes, justice required careful timing. James returned, his composure restored, but his hands shaking slightly. Just a difficult client, nothing to worry about. Before Patricia could respond, her phone lit up with a message from the bank. "Urgent. Please contact First Hartford Bank immediately regarding suspicious transactions." She deleted it quickly. "More condolences," she lied. James wrapped his arms around her waist. "Soon we won't have to hide anymore. No more secret meetings, no more lies." He kissed her neck. "Just you, me, and $20 million. The doorbell rang, shattering the moment. Who could that be at this hour? Patricia whispered, panic rising in her throat. Through the security camera feed, they saw Margaret Wilson standing at the front door holding an envelope. "Quick," Patricia hissed, "hide the champagne." But as they scrambled to erase the evidence of their celebration, they didn't notice Sarah watching from the shadows, sending a text message of her own. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. "Mrs. Harrison?" Margaret's voice carried through the door. "I know you're home. This is important. It's about what Thomas told me before he died." Patricia and James exchanged worried glances. What had Thomas said? What did Margaret know? The paper in Patricia's pocket suddenly felt very heavy. What had she gotten herself into? And somewhere in the city, a phone lit up with Sarah's message. "It's happening exactly as Mr. Harrison predicted. Should I proceed with the next step?" The reply came instantly. "Yes, execute the plan." "Mrs. Harrison, I've brought the video your husband prepared for this exact moment," Richard Montgomery announced, standing in Thomas's study. His presence had interrupted Patricia's attempt to hide evidence of her celebration with James. Margaret Wilson sat rigidly on the leather couch, still holding the mysterious envelope. James tried to leave, but Richard blocked the door. "Mr. Cooper, Mr. Harrison specifically requested your presence as well." Sarah wheeled in a TV screen from Thomas's home office. Patricia's heart pounded as Richard inserted a USB drive. Thomas's face appeared on the screen. Despite his illness, his eyes were sharp and focused. "My dear Patricia, if you're watching this, I'm dead, and you're probably celebrating with James Cooper." Patricia gasped. James's face turned pale. "Yes, I knew about your affair. I knew about the Thursday meetings at the Golden Swan Hotel. I knew everything." Thomas's voice was calm, almost sad. "But that's not why I made this video." He held up a stack of documents. "For the past year, I've been investigating a series of fraudulent real estate schemes targeting wealthy widows. The perpetrator would seduce lonely wives, convince them to invest in fake properties after their husbands' deaths, then disappear with millions." James shifted uncomfortably. "James Cooper isn't who he claims to be," Thomas continued. "His real name is James Conroy. He was fired from Harrison Real Estate 5 years ago for embezzlement. Since then, he's scammed 12 widows across 3 states. Margaret pulled documents from her envelope. "Bank records," she explained. "Offshore accounts in Patricia's name, created 2 months ago. Money's already being funneled through them." "I didn't know about any accounts," Patricia protested. "Of course you didn't," Thomas's voice responded from the screen. "James set them up using information he stole from you. Very clever, making it look like you were part of the scheme." Patricia turned to James, who was already backing toward the door. Is this true? Patricia, he's lying. He's trying to turn you against me, even from the grave. The FBI has been watching you, James, Thomas continued. They're probably moving in right now. As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance. James bolted. By the time Patricia reached the hallway, he was gone. As for you, Patricia, Thomas's voice drew her back to the study. You broke our marriage vows. You betrayed my trust. You celebrated my death. Tears rolled down Patricia's cheeks, real ones this time. Therefore, I've changed my will. The bulk of my fortune will go to charities supporting elderly victims of fraud. You'll receive a modest monthly allowance, enough for a small apartment and basic needs. The mansion goes to the Hartford Community Foundation. You can't do this, Patricia cried at the screen. You have 30 days to vacate the property, Richard stated firmly. One last thing, Thomas added. In my office, there's a hidden safe behind the Hopper painting. Inside, you'll find evidence of something much bigger than James's scams. If you want redemption, Patricia, start there. The screen went dark. Patricia's world spun. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Account frozen, credit card suspended, FBI alert. Mrs. Harrison, a stern voice called from the foyer. 2 FBI agents showed their badges to Sarah. Margaret stood. I'll handle them. Patricia, you should start packing. Alone in the study, Patricia pulled out the paper from James's jacket. It was a receipt for a private plane to the Cayman Islands, scheduled for tomorrow morning. She'd been nothing but a mark. Another lonely wife. Another victim. Moving like a sleepwalker, Patricia walked to Thomas's office. The Hopper painting hung there mockingly. Morning sun, showing a solitary woman staring out a window. What waited in that safe? What had Thomas discovered that was bigger than James's schemes? And more importantly, after everything she'd done, did she deserve a chance at redemption? The painting seemed to watch her as she reached for its frame, her hands trembling. 1 week after Thomas's video revelation, Patricia stood in front of Hartford Gardens Apartments, clutching a single suitcase. The building was a far cry from the Harrison mansion, but it was all she could afford with her new monthly allowance. Your apartment is on the 3rd floor, the manager said. The elevator's been out for maintenance. As Patricia climbed the stairs, her phone kept buzzing with news alerts. Harrison widow implicated in fraud scheme. Socialites fall from grace. Patricia Harrison, from waitress to fraudster. The 1-bedroom apartment was small but clean. Patricia set her suitcase down and checked her bank app. All accounts still frozen pending FBI investigation. Her credit cards were canceled. The only money she had was the cash Margaret had lent her for the security deposit. The phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, darling. James's voice made her stomach turn. Missing the mansion yet? How dare you call me? You stole everything. Now that's not entirely true. You still have those lovely diamond earrings Thomas gave you. Worth about $50,000, I'd say. Sell them, and I'll tell the FBI you weren't involved in the fraud. You're blackmailing me? Insurance, darling. You see, those offshore accounts? Your signatures are all over them. Who do you think they'll believe? The grieving widow who celebrated her husband's death, or the businessman who already left the country? The line went dead. Patricia's hands as she touched her earrings, her last connection to her old life. Her phone buzzed again. An email from her country club. Her membership had been revoked. The local news was running a story about James. Other victims were coming forward. Elderly women who lost their life savings to his schemes. Their stories were painfully similar. Lonely wives, charming investor, disappeared money. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Sarah. The FBI took more boxes from the mansion, the housekeeper said. They're looking for evidence against you. I didn't know about those accounts, Patricia whispered. Maybe not, but you knew what you were doing with James while Mr. Harrison was dying. The words hit harder than any news headline. Sarah left a grocery bag on the counter. Margaret asked me to bring you some basics. Food, toiletries. She paused at the door. You know, other people lost everything too. There's a support group at the community center. Tuesdays at 7. After Sarah left, Patricia opened her laptop. More bad news flooded in. Her social media was filled with harsh comments. Old friends were distancing themselves. The charity boards she served on had removed her name from their websites. Another email arrived from James containing photos of her and him together at the Golden Swan Hotel. Insurance, the subject line read. Patricia looked around the small apartment. The walls seemed to close in. How had she fallen so far so fast? A woman about her age was waiting by the mailboxes downstairs. "I'm Rose," she said simply. "I saw your story on the news. I lost everything to James Cooper 3 years ago." "I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about..." "I'm not here to judge. I'm here because I know something about James that the FBI doesn't. Something that could help you." Patricia hesitated, the last time she trusted someone. "Think about it," Rose said, leaving her card. "Sometimes the only way up is to help others down." That night, Patricia lay on her narrow bed, Thomas's words echoing in her head, evidence of something much bigger. Her phone buzzed one last time, a text from an unknown number. "The safe in the office? That was just the beginning. Keep digging, Mrs. Harrison. The truth is worse than you think." She stared at the message until her screen went dark, reflecting her own haunted face. What had Thomas discovered? And more importantly, was redemption worth the risk of discovering it? The Hartford Community Center buzzed with activity as Patricia followed Rose through the crowded hallway. Elderly men and women gathered in small groups, some doing crafts, others playing cards. It was a world away from her charity galas. 3 years ago, I was running my own real estate agency, Rose said, leading Patricia to a quiet corner. Then I met James. Back then, he called himself James Collins. Patricia sat down, her guard still up. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I know what it's like to be fooled by him. The charming smile, the perfect words, the promises of a better life." Rose pulled out an old newspaper clipping. "Look familiar?" The yellowed paper showed James with another name, another face, standing next to an elderly widow. The headline read, "Local investor missing after widow loses millions." "How many women?" Patricia asked. "We found 12 so far. But that's not the worst part." Rose leaned closer. "James isn't working alone. He's part of something bigger. A network that targets wealthy seniors across the country." A door opened and Margaret Wilson walked in. Patricia stood up, ready to leave. "Sit down, Patricia," Margaret said firmly. "We need to talk." "About what? How you helped Thomas humiliate me? About how Thomas was trying to protect you." Margaret placed a USB drive on the table. "This contains financial records James didn't know we had. Multiple identities, bank accounts, connections to other scammers." Rose nodded. "The same patterns appear in every city. They find vulnerable wealthy seniors, especially widows. It's organized, sophisticated." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," Margaret said, "Thomas discovered something before he died. Something that scared him enough to change his will and leave those clues in the safe." Patricia thought about the documents she'd found behind the painting. Lists of names, dates, properties, none of it making sense at the time. "The community center needs volunteers," Rose said. "Especially in our financial literacy program. Many of our seniors are vulnerable to scams." Patricia laughed bitterly. "Me? Teaching others about fraud? Who better?" Margaret countered. "You've seen how they operate from the inside." A commotion at the entrance interrupted them. 2 FBI agents walked in, scanning the room. "Mrs. Harrison," one called out. "We have some follow-up questions." Before Patricia could respond, Rose stepped forward. "She's volunteering here now. Any questions can go through the center's legal team." The agents exchanged looks but left, leaving more questions than answers. "Why are you really helping me?" Patricia asked Rose. "Because James took something more valuable than money from all of us, our dignity. It's time we took it back." Patricia's phone buzzed. Another message from James. "Think carefully about those earrings, darling. Tick-tock." Margaret noticed her expression. "He's still threatening you?" "He says he has proof I knew about the fraud." "Maybe you did, maybe you didn't," Rose said. "But right now you have a choice. Keep running from your mistakes, or help us stop them from happening to others." The center's door opened again. Sarah walked in, carrying a familiar-looking file. "Found this while clearing out Mr. Harrison's home office," she said, placing it on the table. "Thought you should see it." Inside was a photo of James, younger, different name, standing next to Thomas Harrison. The date showed it was from 15 years ago. "He knew Thomas before?" Patricia whispered. "Keep reading," Sarah urged. The next page made Patricia's blood run cold. It wasn't just about James or the scams. It was about her, about why Thomas had really married her. "There's more," Margaret said quietly. "Much more. But you need to decide right now. Are you in or out? Patricia looked around the community center, at the seniors who could be the next victims, at Rose, who had lost everything but kept fighting, at the file that promised to unravel everything she thought she knew about her life with Thomas. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. The three women exchanged glances. The game was about to change. And somewhere in the Cayman Islands, James's phone lit up with a message. She took the bait. Proceed with Phase 2. The documents spread across Rose's kitchen table painted a disturbing picture. Patricia, Margaret, and Sarah had spent hours connecting the dots of Thomas's investigation. "Look at this pattern." Margaret pointed to a series of transactions. Every victim's money was routed through the same banks in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. Patricia studied the familiar signatures on the offshore accounts. "These look exactly like my signature, but I never signed them." "They have a forgery expert," Rose explained. "He creates perfect copies of signatures, bank statements, everything. It's why their scams are so hard to prove." Sarah pulled Thomas's diary from her bag. "I found this hidden in the library. Mr. Harrison kept detailed notes about everything." Patricia opened the worn leather journal. Her hands trembled as she read. June 15th, confirmed James's connection to the Sterling Group. "This goes deeper than I imagined. They're not just scamming widows, they're infiltrating investment firms, banks, even retirement homes." "The Sterling Group?" Patricia looked up. Thomas mentioned them at dinner parties. Major real estate developers. "A front," Margaret said, "for something much bigger. Thomas was close to exposing them when he died." Patricia turned the page. Her heart stopped. August 3rd. "Patricia must never know the truth about why I married her. The guilt of using her as bait to catch these criminals weighs heavily. But after what they did to Ellen..." "Who's Ellen?" Patricia whispered. Margaret's face darkened. "Thomas's first wife. She didn't die of cancer, like everyone thinks. She discovered the Sterling Group's operation and threatened to expose them. Her illness was very sudden." A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Rose checked the security camera and relaxed. "It's just the FBI agents." Two agents entered, their faces grim. "Mrs. Harrison, we've discovered some troubling information. Your signature appears on documents authorizing transfers from Mr. Harrison's accounts days before his death." "That's impossible. I never. We have video footage of you at Hartford National Bank that day." Patricia's mind raced. She hadn't been to any bank. Unless... The diary entry caught her eye. They have technology to create deep fakes. Videos, photos, audio, all perfect forgeries. Her phone buzzed. "James, enjoying the FBI's visit? Amazing what technology can do these days. Remember our deal about those earrings?" Margaret grabbed the phone. "He's playing you. The evidence isn't real." "Real enough to convince a jury," Agent Miller replied. "Mrs. Harrison, we need you to come with us." Sarah suddenly stood up. "Show them, Margaret." Margaret hesitated, then pulled out another file. "Thomas was working with us. Corporate Fraud Division. These documents prove the videos are fake." The agent studied the papers. "Why wasn't this submitted earlier?" "Because," Rose interjected, "we needed James to think his plan was working. He's getting sloppy, making mistakes." Patricia's phone buzzed again. A video message from James. She played it on speaker. "Dear Patricia, by now you've discovered Thomas's little investigation. Shame he didn't live to finish it. But don't worry, you'll be joining him soon enough." The threat hung in the air. "We've been monitoring his communications," Agent Miller said. "This could be the break we needed." Another message appeared. "Check tomorrow's news. Your reputation won't survive what's coming." Margaret grabbed Patricia's arm. "We need to move fast. Thomas left one more thing in the safe, something we've kept hidden until now." "What?" "Evidence that could bring down their entire operation. But to access it, we need to do exactly what they don't expect." "Which is?" "Make you disappear, tonight." Sarah nodded grimly. "It's the only way to protect you and complete Thomas's investigation." Patricia looked around the room, at Thomas's diary, the fake documents, the threatening messages. Everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie. "You have 10 minutes to decide," Margaret said. "After that, it'll be too late." The clock ticked. A decision had to be made. And somewhere in the Cayman Islands, James smiled as another message appeared on his screen. "Target is ready for extraction. Proceed with elimination protocol." Pack light and don't use your credit cards, Margaret instructed as Patricia grabbed essentials from her apartment. From now on, you're Jennifer Baker, a volunteer from Ohio. Patricia's hands shook as she read more from Thomas's diary. September 10. The cancer diagnosis isn't real. Dr. Phillips confirmed my suspicions. Someone tampered with my test results. They know I'm close to exposing them. I have weeks, maybe days, to protect Patricia and finish this. He knew they were killing him, Patricia whispered. That's why he made the video and changed his will, Sarah explained. He needed everyone to believe you were just another victim of James's scam. Margaret's phone rang. Her face paled. They've taken Rose. What? Patricia dropped the diary. Message from James. She's safe for now. Tell Patricia to check her email. Patricia opened her inbox. A video showed Rose tied to a chair in an empty room. James's voice came through. Hello, darling. Surprised? Don't worry, Rose is just insurance. Come alone to the Golden Swan Hotel, midnight. Bring Thomas's files, all of them. It's a trap, Margaret said. We can't let them hurt Rose. They'll kill you both. Margaret pulled out her phone. Agent Miller, they've escalated. We need... The power went out. Sarah rushed to the window. Black van across the street. Back door, Margaret whispered. Now. They slipped into the dark hallway. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. In the alley behind the building, Margaret's car waited. Get in. What about Rose? Trust me, Margaret started the engine. We have a plan. As they drove, Patricia read more from the diary. September 15. The Sterling Group isn't just stealing money. They're buying judges, police chiefs, bank executives. Every major city has been infiltrated. Ellen discovered their list of corrupted officials. That's why they killed her. Here's what Thomas didn't write, Margaret said, driving fast. He'd been working with the FBI for years, gathering evidence. James wasn't just some con man who seduced you. He was sent to watch you, to make sure you didn't discover what Thomas was doing. But why marry me? Protection. They wouldn't kill Thomas while he had a young, high-profile wife. It would draw too much attention. He chose you because you were genuine, someone the public would sympathize with. Patricia felt sick. Our whole marriage was a lie? No, Sarah interjected. He truly cared for you. That's why he left the clues, the diary, everything you'd need to finish what he started. Margaret's phone buzzed. Another video. Rose, still tied up, but now James stood beside her. Tick-tock, Patricia. 1 hour until midnight. Oh, and don't bother going to the FBI. We own half the local office. We can't trust anyone, Margaret said. Then how do we save Rose? With this. Margaret handed Patricia a flash drive. Thomas's real evidence. Names, dates, bank accounts, everything to bring down the Sterling Group. James doesn't know we have it. What's the plan? You meet James. Wear this. She handed Patricia a necklace. It's a tracker and recorder. Play along. Act desperate. We'll handle the rest. Sarah's phone chimed. Message from the clinic. Thomas's autopsy results were just changed. They're erasing evidence of the poisoning. They're cleaning house? Margaret said grimly. We have to move fast. Patricia clutched Thomas's diary. All those years, he'd been fighting this battle alone, protecting her, knowing they would eventually kill him. Her phone lit up. James again. Getting nervous, darling? Don't be. Just bring me what I want, and this all goes away. You can have your old life back, all of it. The Golden Swan Hotel loomed ahead. Ready? Margaret asked. Patricia touched the necklace, thinking of Thomas, of Rose, of all the lives destroyed by these people. Yes. Remember, no matter what happens in there, stick to the plan. As Patricia stepped out of the car, a final text came through, not from James this time. Mrs. Harrison, you don't know me, but I worked with Thomas. What you're about to find out, it's worse than you imagine. Trust no one, even now, you're being watched. The hotel's revolving door beckoned. Somewhere inside, Rose waited, and James smiled, watching through security cameras as Patricia walked into his trap. The Golden Swan Hotel lobby was deserted at midnight. Patricia's heels echoed as she walked to the elevator, Thomas's diary and fake flash drive in her purse. The real evidence remained with Margaret. Room 1542, James's text read. Come alone. The elevator opened on the 15th floor. 2 men in suits watched her pass. James opened the door before she could knock. Patricia, darling, right on time. Rose sat tied to a chair, duct tape across her mouth. Her eyes went wide when she saw Patricia. The files? James held out his hand. Patricia clutched her purse. Let her go first. That's not how this works. He pulled out a gun. Files, now. She handed over the diary and flash drive. James tossed them to one of the suited men. Check them. The man plugged in the drive, scanning files. It's all here. Financial records, offshore accounts, everything Harrison collected. James smiled. See? Cooperation makes everything easier. Now. Sir, the man interrupted. These files, they're dated last week. James's smile vanished. He grabbed Patricia's arm. Where are the real files? Those are real. The gun pressed against her ribs. Thomas died 3 months ago. He couldn't have created files last week. A phone rang. The second man answered, listened, then turned to James. We found Margaret Wilson's car in the parking garage. She's here. Bring her up. Rose made muffled sounds through the tape. Quiet, James snapped. He turned to Patricia. You really thought you could trick me? That Thomas's little evidence collection could stop us? Why did you have to kill him? Kill him? Patricia, you still don't get it. He laughed. Thomas Harrison wasn't just gathering evidence. He was one of us. You're lying. Am I? How do you think he built his real estate empire? Who do you think introduced me to the Sterling Group? Your precious Thomas was laundering money for us for decades. Then why did you kill him? Because he grew a conscience. Started keeping records, threatening to expose everything. Ellen's death was supposed to be a warning, but he didn't listen. The door burst open. Margaret stumbled in, held by the men from the hallway. Found this in her car. One held up a laptop and the real flash drive. James grabbed the drive. Finally. It's encrypted, Margaret spat. Not a problem. We have people for that. He turned to Patricia. Now, about those loose ends. A gunshot exploded through the room. One of the suited men fell. FBI, drop your weapons. Agent Miller burst in with a tactical team. James grabbed Patricia, gun to her head. Stay back. I'll kill her. That's not happening. The voice came from behind them. Sarah stepped out of the bathroom, holding a gun on James. Sarah? Patricia gasped. Agent Sarah Miller, FBI. I've been undercover in the Harrison household for 2 years. James laughed desperately. You think this changes anything? The Sterling Group owns half the... Not anymore, Sarah said. While you were focused on Patricia, federal agents were arresting your corrupt officials in 12 cities. It's over. You don't understand what you're doing. James's hand shook. They'll kill everyone who knows. Like they killed Thomas? Patricia asked. Thomas killed himself. Once he realized we knew about his evidence, he chose to die on his terms. The poison in his study. Patricia remembered Thomas's last day. His insistence on drinking his special scotch alone. More agents flooded the room. James's gun clattered to the floor. As they led him away, he turned back. Patricia, you need to know. A single shot rang out. James slumped forward. Sniper! Agent Miller shouted. Secure the building. But Patricia barely heard the chaos. She was staring at Thomas's diary, understanding finally hitting her. He hadn't just been gathering evidence. He'd been leaving a trail, knowing they would kill him, making sure his death would lead to their exposure. And he'd chosen her, not just as protection, but because he'd seen something in that waitress who offered to pay for his dry cleaning, someone strong enough to finish what he started. Margaret and Sarah rushed to untie Rose while agents secured the scene. Patricia's phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. Phase 1 complete. But Mrs. Harrison, the real war is just beginning. Are you ready to learn what Thomas really died for? We need to get you to a safe house, Agent Sarah Miller said as they left the Golden Swan Hotel. The Sterling Group won't stop with James. In the FBI's secure room downtown, Patricia watched the surveillance footage from the hotel. The sniper who killed James had vanished without a trace. Thomas left one more thing, Margaret said, pulling out a sealed envelope. He told me to give it to you only if James died. Patricia's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a key and a note. If you're reading this, they've shown their hand. Union Trust Bank, Box 2337. But remember, the enemy of my enemy isn't always my friend. What's that supposed to mean? Patricia asked. It means, Rose said, there's more to this than just the Sterling Group. Agent Miller spread photos across the table. These were taken last week. Known Sterling Group operatives meeting with federal officials, judges, even foreign diplomats. They're not just stealing from widows, Margaret explained. They're buying influence, controlling policy decisions, manipulating markets. Patricia's phone lit up with a news alert. Breaking. FBI director steps down amid corruption allegations. It's starting, Agent Miller said. The evidence Thomas gathered is bringing down their network. But why kill James? Patricia asked. He could have exposed everything. Because he knew something else, Rose said. Something about Thomas's real mission. Sarah checked her gun. We need to get to that safety deposit box before they do. First, Margaret interrupted, Patricia needs to make a public statement, something to make the Sterling Group think we're backing off. An hour later, Patricia faced news cameras outside FBI headquarters. My husband's death was a tragedy, she read from prepared notes. James Cooper was a troubled man who betrayed many people. I'm cooperating with authorities and ask for privacy during this difficult time. Back in the secure room, Agent Miller nodded. Perfect. They'll think we're closing the case. Now what? Patricia asked. Now we spring our trap. Sarah pulled out building plans for Union Trust Bank. They'll be watching the main entrance. We'll go in through the old service tunnel. Too risky, Margaret objected. What if? An explosion rocked the building. Emergency lights flashed. They're here! Agent Miller drew her weapon. How did they find us? Rose demanded. Because, a familiar voice said, they never lost us. Agent Wilson stepped in, gun raised. Half the tactical team flanked him. Karen? Sarah stared at her fellow agent. You're with them? Sorry, Sarah. Sterling Group pays better than the FBI. Patricia's mind raced. Thomas's warning, the enemy of my enemy. The safety deposit box, Agent Wilson said. Where's the key? Gone, Patricia replied. I destroyed it. Wrong answer. He aimed at Rose. Patricia reached for her necklace, the one Margaret gave her with the tracker. Looking for this? Agent Wilson held up a crushed device. We found it an hour ago. Now, the key. Sarah moved slightly, blocking Patricia from view. Last chance, Wilson warned. Patricia touched her earring. James's supposed blackmail target. The diamonds Thomas gave her. The ones he'd specifically mentioned in his video. Okay, she said, you win. She reached for her purse, then dropped it. As Wilson's men watched the purse, she pulled her earring off and threw it. The flash grenade hidden inside exploded. Run! Sarah shouted. They burst into the hallway. Gunfire erupted behind them. Split up. Margaret grabbed Rose. Meet at the backup location. Patricia followed Sarah toward the emergency stairs. Thomas knew, Sarah said as they ran. He knew we had corrupt agents. The earrings weren't for blackmail, they were weapons. Patricia's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Well played, Mrs. Harrison, but did you really think Thomas only left you one safety deposit box key? Another explosion shook the building. They're hurting us, Sarah realized. Where? To the bank. Sarah checked her ammunition. They want us to open that box. Why? What's in it? Something worse than evidence. Sarah's face was grim. The real reason Thomas died. Sirens wailed outside. More explosions. We can't stay here, Sarah said. Ready to learn what your husband really died for? Patricia thought of Thomas, of his secret war, of all the lies and truths tangled together. Ready. They pushed through the emergency door into chaos. And somewhere, watching through surveillance cameras, someone smiled. Begin Phase 3. Union Trust Bank loomed ahead as Patricia and Sarah navigated the chaos in downtown Hartford. Fire trucks and police cars blocked intersections. Smoke rose from the FBI building behind them. Thomas's real evidence isn't about fraud or corruption, Sarah explained as they moved through back alleys. It's about Project Legacy. What's Project Legacy? A plan to control the entire U.S. financial system. The Sterling Group isn't just stealing money, they're positioning themselves to manipulate global markets. They reached the bank's service entrance. Sarah's FBI credentials got them inside. Thomas discovered their endgame, Sarah continued, leading them through the basement. They're not just buying officials. They're placing their people in every major financial institution, preparing for something bigger. Patricia's phone buzzed. A video message showed Margaret and Rose safely at the backup location, an old church outside the city. The safety deposit box, Patricia said. Why do they want us to open it? Because they can't. Thomas used specialized security. It needs both a key and his wife's fingerprints. Then we're walking into a trap. Yes, but we need what's in that box. The vault level was deserted. Sarah checked her weapon. Ready? Patricia inserted the key into box 2317. Her fingers trembled on the scanner. The box clicked open. Inside was a single USB drive and a letter. Dear Patricia, the letter began. If you're reading this, you know about Project Legacy. What you don't know is that I helped create it. The Sterling Group recruited me 30 years ago. I believed we were modernizing the financial system. By the time I realized their true plan, I was in too deep. Ma'am. A guard appeared, gun raised. Step away from the box. More armed men emerged from the shadows. Agent Miller. A man in an expensive suit stepped forward. Or should I say, Agent Sarah Reynolds? Did you really think we wouldn't recognize you from the Chicago operation? Sarah's face hardened. Director Phillips, still doing the Sterling Group's dirty work? You don't understand what's at stake. Phillips turned to Patricia. Mrs. Harrison, your husband was a brilliant man, but he let conscience cloud his judgment. He tried to stop you, Patricia said. Stop progress? Project Legacy will prevent financial crashes, stabilize markets, ensure American dominance. Yes, some will lose money, some will lose everything, but the system will be controlled. By you, by people who understand power. He held out his hand. The drive, please. Sarah raised her gun. Every guard aimed at her. Don't, Phillips warned. Patricia clutched the drive. Thomas's last words echoed, the enemy of my enemy. She looked at Sarah, at Phillips, at the guards. Then she smiled. You're right, Patricia said. Thomas was brilliant. She pulled out her phone and pressed send. Every screen in the vault lit up. Thomas's face appeared. Hello, Robert, Thomas's recording addressed Phillips. If you're seeing this, Patricia followed my trail perfectly. While you were watching her, FBI teams were moving into position at every Sterling Group location nationwide. The evidence isn't in that safety deposit box. It's already been distributed to every major news organization and law enforcement agency in the world. Phillips grabbed his phone. Alerts flooded in. Sterling Group officials arrested worldwide. Market manipulation scheme exposed. Project Legacy documents released. You played us, Phillips realized. No, Patricia said. Thomas played you. He knew you'd follow me to this box. Knew you'd send every available asset to stop me. While your people were here. The real raids were happening everywhere else, Sarah finished as FBI teams burst into the vault. Phillips dropped his gun. Robert Phillips, Sarah said, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and the murder of Thomas Harrison. As they led Phillips away, Patricia opened the USB drive. Instead of evidence, she found a video file. My dear Patricia, Thomas's face appeared one last time. I'm sorry for all the deception, but I knew they had to believe our marriage was just a cover. The truth is, I loved you from the moment you offered to pay for my dry cleaning. Your honesty, your kindness, they reminded me of who I used to be. You helped me find my conscience again. Patricia wiped tears as she watched. I know you'll do the right thing with the foundation money. Help those they hurt, teach others to protect themselves. And remember, sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning the fight, but in choosing the right side. The video ended. Sarah touched her shoulder. Ready to go? Patricia looked at the empty safety deposit box, thinking of all the secrets it helped expose. Yes, we have work to do. Her phone buzzed one last time. Phase 3 complete. Project Legacy terminated. Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. Thomas would be proud. 6 months after the Sterling Group's collapse, Patricia sat in Thomas's old office at Harrison Real Estate. The company had been cleared of wrongdoing, and the board had asked her to lead their new financial protection division. Our first senior protection seminar starts next week, Rose said, reviewing the schedule. We already have 200 registered. Margaret entered with the morning papers. The headlines told the story of their success. Sterling Group leaders face life sentences. Congress passes Harrison Act to protect senior investors. FBI completes largest financial fraud cleanup in history. Thomas would love this, Margaret said, using their own money to protect people from fraud. The Harrison Foundation, funded by recovered Sterling Group assets, had launched programs nationwide. Patricia's experience as a victim helped her connect with other survivors. Sarah, now promoted to FBI task force leader, arrived with updates. We've identified 3 more fraud networks using the Sterling Group's methods. Thanks to Thomas's detection software, we can spot their patterns early. Patricia opened her laptop, showing the Foundation's latest project. The education program is expanding to 50 more cities. Rose's team has already trained over 1,000 seniors to recognize scam attempts. Mrs. Harrison? Her assistant interrupted. The new investors are here. A group of elderly fraud survivors entered, former victims now learning to manage their own investments. Welcome to our investment protection workshop, Patricia began. I know what it's like to trust the wrong people, to lose everything, but also to fight back. As she spoke, her phone lit up with a message from the Attorney General. Financial Crime Task Force approved. You'll head the Civilian Advisory Board. The scammers are still out there, Patricia continued. They're finding new ways to steal from vulnerable people, but we're getting smarter too. Rose distributed handouts showing common fraud tactics. These are the warning signs Thomas identified, the patterns he discovered while infiltrating their network. Knowledge is power, Patricia said. That's what Thomas believed. He spent years gathering evidence, not just to stop one group, but to create a system to protect people. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another fraud ring had been detected using Thomas's software. FBI teams were moving in. Mrs. Harrison? An elderly woman raised her hand. I lost my savings to people like the Sterling Group. How do you trust again? Patricia thought carefully. We trust by learning, by working together, by turning victims into protectors. The meeting continued as more success stories arrived. Miami ring busted using Harrison Protocol. Senior Defense Network expands to Canada. Investment scams dropped 60% in protected areas. Later, alone in the office, Patricia found a hidden note in Thomas's desk. The greatest victory over evil isn't just stopping it, it's helping its victims become strong enough to stop it themselves. Her phone rang. The FBI director wanted to discuss expanding the program internationally. Margaret knocked. Ready for the board meeting? They want to discuss funding senior protection centers in every state. Patricia looked at Thomas's photo on the wall. The man who had fought this battle alone for so long had created an army of protectors. The quarterly numbers are amazing, Rose added. 10,000 seniors protected. 20 fraud rings exposed. $30 million recovered. And that's just the beginning, Sarah said. The Harrison Protocol is becoming the global standard for fraud detection. Patricia gathered her materials for the board meeting. Thomas had given her everything, not just wealth and status, but a purpose. A mission. Her phone lit up with another message. Fraud attempt detected in Boston. Harrison Protocol activated. Threat contained. She smiled. The system was working. They were winning. And somewhere she knew Thomas was proud. The battle wasn't over, but now they had an army of survivors turned protectors, each with their own story, each determined to help others avoid their fate. Ready? Margaret asked. Patricia looked at the photo of Thomas one last time. Ready. We have work to do. 1 year after Thomas Harrison's death, hundreds gathered at the newly built Harrison Financial Protection Center in Hartford. The modern building stood as a testament to transformation, both of the city's financial district and of Patricia herself. Today, we honor not just Thomas Harrison's memory, Patricia addressed the crowd, but the thousands of survivors who turned their pain into purpose. The audience included fraud survivors from across the country, each wearing a pin symbolizing their role as certified financial protection advisors. Among them sat former Sterling Group victims, now helping others protect their savings. 1 year ago, I stood in this city with nothing, Patricia continued. I'd lost my husband, my home, my reputation. But Thomas left us something more valuable than money. He left us a mission. Screens behind her displayed the numbers: 50,000 seniors protected, $500 million in fraud prevented, 100 criminal networks exposed, 1,000 corrupted officials arrested, 5,000 trained protection advisors. Margaret stepped up to the podium. The Harrison Protocol has become the global standard in fraud prevention. What started as one man's fight is now an international movement. Sarah, representing the FBI, shared the latest victories. This month alone, we prevented 30 major fraud attempts. The software Thomas developed now protects millions of vulnerable investors worldwide. Rose introduced the newest program, a partnership with major banks to install fraud detection systems. The predators are still out there, but now we can spot them before they strike. After the ceremony, Patricia walked through the center's halls. Each room told a story of recovery and reinvention. Investment protection workshops filled with seniors learning to safeguard their futures, technology labs where experts monitored fraud patterns, counseling rooms where survivors helped new victims rebuild their lives, training facilities for the next generation of protection advisors. In Thomas's memorial library, Patricia found Sarah reviewing case files. "Remember this?" Sarah held up a photo of the Golden Swan Hotel. "Hard to believe it was just a year ago." "Sometimes I still feel like that naive widow," Patricia admitted. "You were never naive," Margaret said, joining them. "Thomas chose you because he saw your strength." Rose arrived with breaking news. "The last Sterling Group holdouts were arrested in Switzerland. It's really over." Patricia's phone buzzed with an alert from the Harrison Protocol system. Potential fraud pattern detected in Phoenix. Local team responding. Threat contained. "Mrs. Harrison?" A senior citizen approached. "I lost everything to scammers last year. Your program helped me recover my savings. Now, I'm helping others do the same." Similar stories echoed through the building. Tales of loss transformed into triumph, of victims becoming protectors. Patricia walked to her office, now filled with letters from people they'd helped. On her desk sat Thomas's diary, open to his final entry. "My dearest Patricia, by the time you read this, you'll understand why I couldn't tell you everything. The Sterling Group thought they could control the world through fear and greed. But I discovered something stronger. The resilience of those they hurt. The power of people helping people. You weren't just my wife or my cover story. You were my inspiration. Your kindness showed me that true wealth isn't in what we have, but in what we give. Your strength proved that our greatest falls can lead to our highest purpose. The foundation isn't just my legacy, it's yours. You've turned victims into warriors, fear into power, loss into purpose. That's the real victory. Keep fighting, keep protecting, keep turning darkness into light. All my love, Thomas." The intercom buzzed. The next protection seminar was starting. Sarah entered with the latest statistics. Fraud attempts down 80% in protected areas, recovery rates up 90%, public trust in financial institutions restored. "Ready for the next chapter?" Margaret asked. Patricia looked at the photo of Thomas on her wall, then at the room full of survivors turned protectors. Each face told a story of resilience, each person now part of something bigger than themselves. Her phone showed another Harrison Protocol alert. "System updated. New protection features activated. Global network secure." Outside her window, seniors arrived for their training sessions, each determined to help others avoid the traps they'd fallen into. The building hummed with purpose, not just protecting the vulnerable, but transforming them into guardians. "Thomas said something to me once," Patricia shared. "He said the greatest victory isn't in winning the fight, but in teaching others to never be victims again." The center's motto glowed on the wall. From victims to protectors, the Harrison legacy lives on. Her phone lit up one last time. A message from an unknown number. "1 year ago, you lost everything. Today, you've helped thousands find their strength. Well done, Mrs. Harrison. The true legacy was always in your hands." Patricia smiled, gathering her materials for the next session. The old Patricia, the naive widow, the betrayed wife, was gone. In her place stood a warrior, a protector, a leader, and somewhere she knew Thomas was smiling too. "Ready," she said. The next group of seniors waited to learn, to heal, to transform. The cycle would continue, victims becoming protectors, loss becoming purpose, pain becoming power. This was Thomas's real gift, not the money or the mansion or the social status, but the chance to make a difference, to turn tragedy into triumph, to help others rise from their own ashes. The true American dream wasn't about wealth or status. It was about purpose, resilience, and the power to change lives. And that dream was very much alive. After the day's final session, Patricia walked to her car in the growing dusk. The center's lights glowed behind her, a beacon of hope in the city skyline. But her day wasn't over yet. She drove to Oak Hill Cemetery, where Thomas was buried. It had become her tradition to visit on milestone days, to share their victories with him. "You should have seen them today," she said softly, placing roses on his grave. Mrs. Anderson, who lost her retirement to scammers, just helped prevent a $1 million fraud ring. Mr. Peters, who almost lost his house, now teaches cybersecurity to seniors. The evening breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves, reminding her of that day at the funeral, when everything changed. Her phone buzzed. The Harrison Protocol had just stopped another attempt, this time targeting veterans in Florida. The scammers had used AI-generated voice clips to impersonate military officers. They keep finding new tricks, she mused, but we keep getting smarter. Margaret's car pulled up nearby. They had one more task tonight. Together they drove to Hartford Women's Prison, where Ellen's killer was serving life. The former Sterling Group operative had finally agreed to tell them everything, about Ellen's murder, about Thomas's recruitment, about the organization's true origins. Ready for the final piece of the puzzle? Margaret asked. Patricia nodded. Understanding the past would help them protect the future. Back at her apartment, modest but comfortable, bought with her own earnings, Patricia opened her laptop. Tomorrow, she would testify before Congress about expanding senior protection laws nationwide. The Harrison Act was just the beginning. Sarah called with updates from Europe. The Harrison Protocol had been adopted by the European Union. Asia would follow next month. We're going global, Sarah said. Just like Thomas dreamed. On her wall hung the framed receipt from Joey's diner, the coffee stain that changed her life. Beside it, a photo of their growing team. Former victims, FBI agents, financial experts, all united in one mission. Her phone showed another success. An elderly couple in Oregon had recognized a scam attempt thanks to their training. They'd helped the FBI catch 3 fraudsters. The ripple effect, Thomas used to say. Help one person stand up, they'll help 10 more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new schemes to decode, new victims to protect. But they were ready. The true legacy wasn't just in stopping criminals. It was in rebuilding trust, restoring dignity, and proving that America's greatest strength was in its people helping people. Patricia looked at the city lights, thinking of all the lives they'd touched, all the stories yet to unfold. The American dream hadn't died, it had evolved. From pursuit of wealth to protection of others, from individual success to collective strength. And in that transformation, they had all found something greater than riches. They had found purpose. Her phone lit up one final time. Harrison Protocol activating worldwide. All systems go. The future was secure, not because of technology or laws, but because of people who refused to let darkness win. That was Thomas's greatest gift. Not just to her, but to everyone they'd helped. And it would live on, growing stronger, reaching further, protecting forever. The true legacy had only just begun.